talking about African agency. I'm actually looking at participants, and I'm asking, do you have any representation from Kenyan government, mainstream players? And this, for me, is what I'm asking. There is a gap. Those in academia, myself and colleague here, I see familiar faces, really, a representative from civil society. Where are government officials? We need to come together and have constructive dialogue around the question of African agency, so that them, as they also do bidding on behalf of the locals, they know the right vocabularies, they know how to articulate and aggregate these issues, so that towards the end, we want to see those voices amplified, Chair. So that will be my concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. The new Chair of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Nairobi. The idea is that he has fallen into things as far as the department is concerned. Nicodemus, your reflection.
For me, my final reflections are all about broadening the conversations, that African agency should be about African voices in the global stage as well. How can we be able to be part of global conversations? And I think let's not narrow it down to just African exceptionalism, but of course being part of broader conversations and being able to really speak to broader global political, social, economic issues, and projecting our African voices there. So for me, I think that is very, very important.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we shouldn't really amplify it more than we have already done. It seems to me, at least we have talked. At least we have talked about the African agency. But in the practical scheme of things, we need to borrow, if I may use that adage, we need to borrow a leaf from the way other national states have managed to power up their agency. Today we speak of the Chinese because the Chinese took industrialization seriously. We are talking about the Indians because the Indians took industrialization seriously. We are talking about the Europeans and how they colonized us because they took industrialization seriously. Now we're imagining the next frontier of contention as far as international politics is concerned, having the Latin America on board because they are taking industrialization seriously. There is no shortcut. I was told by a German diplomat that in the year 2000, Germany was among those that were considered to be the sick men of Europe. Just 10 years down the road, because they took industrialization seriously, now you cannot dare talk about the politics of the world without German. Even where they are not, you will speak about the Germans. If we are to power the African agency, we need to reinvent. We need to reinvent. We may not necessarily reinvent, but we need to think of how we can power the steam engine of our industrialization. Without that, we shall continue doing what the comrade has referred to as, without mentioning that we have talked. So we need really to take industrialization serious. We need a firm commitment. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for having listened so attentively to our discourse. I thank the panelists, Nicodemus, Chairman Otere, Madam Eka Basso, and Maldrin from Germany. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much for listening, and for the panels for the wonderful this. And thank you so much, Bob, for affording us enough time. But what else were you supposed to do? The African agency is very critical. Thank you so much.
Right. Another very rambunctious applause. I think we are lucky to have had a very well-placed, well-thought-out thoughts, for the panel that has started as off. But that has also meant that we have to catch up on time. We are sorry that we had a technical glitch such that in the morning we didn't quite have Professor Ambassador Bitange Nembo speak, and we've been keeping him out there in Brussels in his seat, just waiting for this. He's not undertaking any other diplomatic activity, but waiting to speak. And so I think it is his turn, the technical team, if you can facilitate the virtual presentation by Ambassador Bitange Ndemo. And crossing our fingers, hoping it works this time round. This is part of agency, I guess. Yeah. Okay, no, I think I can see Prof. Okay, here you go. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can. Yes, we can.
Because you are not coming through clearly, even as I listened to others' speeches. First, I must say something about what has been. I wish you had given me a chance to speak about the role of African voices, because I just finished reading a book by Carlos Lopez, which I've shared with my brother Bob, and I wish you can share it widely. Spends a lot of chapters about the emotional past, making reference to Ngugi wa Thiong'o and other African thinkers from the past. What is pertaining, especially with the Western world and China, and that is the discussion that we are in at the moment. The reason why I'm speaking, saying that I wish we had a session to talk about the role of technology in getting us to the future, meaning that we shouldn't be complaining forever emotionally about the future, which would change where we have been. And AI is doing it. A lot of work is going on in Africa, which may change the way we've been looking at it. You've been discussing this here, but it's very difficult for you to discuss it with people at the village because they can't conceptualize what you've been conceptualizing in these discussions. And by getting our languages into what they call large language models, where we can discuss our languages, force governments to have, like we have the French Cultural Center, the German Cultural Center, now the Chinese Cultural Center. We need to have our own languages, to build our languages, to come up with new vocabularies where people understand. Nonetheless, let me go back to my area that I wanted to speak very quickly. This is the relationship or the European Union, the role it plays between China, US, and the discussions that we have today. EU plays a nuanced and strategic role in Africa, China, and the US-Africa relationships, often acting as a mediating force that balances competing influences while promoting its own interests. With growing Chinese and American engagements in Africa, the EU approach includes, they have been mostly focusing on aid, which is why aid has been more detrimental to Africa than what Africa was seeking. And what we are seeking here is greater partnerships, especially in economic, and hopefully we can structurally change our economies. And that's one of the participants said about going back to industrialization. And we've been talking about structural changes, structures, we don't see that. The Europeans have a higher hand over China and the US in the sense that we have a very big to the colonial times. These historical ties, especially with former colonies, the policies, unlike the approach of China and the US. These former colonies have broad presence across the continent. The EU remains a significant stakeholder to influence political and economic stability in Africa. And also they talk more about development. We're beginning to challenge. We talk about the free trade economic partnership agreements. Some of you remember the Cotonou agreement, the ACP Africa, ACP Europe relationships. But sometimes they do this and then they bring in a lot of regulations. Africa doesn't quite benefit largely, but we are hoping that this time we could discuss with our open mind and see whether we can benefit from it. And that would change the dynamics between China and the US relationships with them. It sort of acts as an economic mediator in terms of trade partnerships. And that's why when China came in with China Belt and Road Initiative, they quickly came up with the global gateway. But what is happening very quickly is that the speed that China does its work and scale, neither US or EU can actually match that. And that changes the narrative on the ground when people see major infrastructures and the two other bigger players in Africa, EU and Africa, have so many other issues that with development, sometimes delaying some of the developments, and especially now that Africa is getting more and more democratic, the politicians would find it much quicker to deal with China, to put something on the ground, than actually waiting until they behave well to be able to benefit from either US or Europe. But Europe has been trying to respond to China, and the US sees it that this is my brother who is doing it. So it sort of mediates between those two countries. And Europe has come under something we call security and partnership and diplomatic influence, which is sort of complicated, especially in mitigating against or mediating against peacekeeping in Africa. So unlike the US military focus, such as AFRICOM, with security clauses, the EU prioritizes peacekeeping and diplomatic mediation in every conflict in Africa. This approach, which is aimed at stabilizing the region, especially terrorism, insurgency, and political unrest, making EU a trusted partner maintaining peace and stability. So then you recall, again, I said EU does a lot of work with the African Union, practically funding the African Union. So perhaps that's why you saw China investing so much in building the headquarters in Ethiopia. So the EU soft power initiatives, or what we call the normative influence, also play some key in terms of mediation. The EU promotes standards for human rights, governance, environmental protection, a lot about sustainability in virtually everything that we discuss here. There's a moral counterbalance to China's state-led investment model, which often overlooks some of these can sometimes prioritize security over governance. Of course, someone said educational and culture, though you are seeing more and more students going to China, through programs like Erasmus, the EU invests in education, cultural exchange, fostering long-term relationship, bolstering EU soft power. These programs help to create an educated African workforce. US did once, I think they moved out of it. And there are very much fewer scholarships to US than the EU. So you can ask yourself, what are the challenges here? That while the EU has extensive diplomatic influence, its economic investments are generally smaller than that of China. I said that this can limit its ability to match the scale and the speed of China's infrastructure project, which remain attractive to not just the governments. Even when you go to the village, people say, oh, the Chinese did this. They are able to see what's happening on the ground. And I think the EU-US must begin to think about the speed at which they deliver the promises that work within Africa. So the EU, they also have a lot of problems. Different member states often varying priorities and levels of engagement in Africa. This can lead, or actually it's leading to fragmented policies. You are seeing more and more far right, especially in Germany, other countries fearing African immigrants. These are the real serious challenges that we are facing, or EU is facing. US is facing the same problems of migration. But as what I must say is that Africa must begin to think around how to play in this very complex space. Do we include everybody, what we call inclusivity, that everybody understands all these concepts, or we just get a few academics who meet in the morning to discuss about this, and then we don't see it on the ground. It's no longer saying, where is government in this? Well, the government is there. I'm a government official. We are discussing this, but I think we must figure out that what Ngugi said about language is very, very critical. How do we begin to educate people and understand them conceptually, as seeing the Chinese or the Europeans on the ground? Thank you for the few minutes. I would have spoken more, but there were some problems. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there's an echo. And thanks very much, Professor Ndemo and